Welcome. Today, expedition travel expert Karl Kannstadter, bringing 37 years of experience, shares what makes Arctic and Antarctic cruises so unique and why each offers an adventure like no other.
We're going to speak about the Arctic versus Antarctica. Not so much a versus that implies that one is better than the other or one is stronger than the other. We're going to compare the two of them and what sets expedition cruises to both of these regions apart, how the two are different. So should you go to the north or should you go to the south? Frankly, I think you should go to both. Both of these are once in a lifetime trips. It's a big decision. It's a big investment. And you want to choose the one that's right for you. And how are we going to choose? Well, first, we're going to look at the geography. The Arctic is what you would think about when you think about the North Pole and the surrounding areas. It's a frozen ocean surrounded by countries, Norway, Greenland, Canada, and these big land masses surrounding this frozen ocean. The Antarctic is the exact opposite, literally. It's on the other side of the Earth, the South Pole. And it's a continent. Where the Arctic is a frozen ocean, Antarctica is a frozen continent. And it's massive, and it's surrounded by oceans. So a frozen ocean surrounded by continents, a frozen continent surrounded by oceans. Those are the big differences. Antarctica, frozen continent surrounded by deep oceans. And that's significant because it impacts the weather and it impacts the temperature of the water, which impacts the overall climate around Antarctica. So here we've got a satellite image. There is the continent of Antarctica. You can see the southern tip of South America right at the top center. And off to the left, you can see the southern tip of Africa just over there. And to the right, I said left, off to the right is the southern tip of Africa. And off to the left and down below, you see a little bit of New Zealand. That's just to put it in perspective. Where is everything when we look at the continent of Antarctica from space? And the closest that Antarctica gets to a landmass is South America, as you can see in the top center. Here it is a little bit closer. This is the Antarctic continent satellite view from space. This is what it looks like. So it's quite remote. And as I said, it's a frozen continent surrounded by oceans. It takes 2 days to sail from the southern tip of South America to the tip of Antarctica. So it is literally surrounded by ocean, okay? And this is where we approach from, the southern tip of South America, to get over here to the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. This is where Antarctica is its closest to any inhabited landmass. The Arctic, by contrast, is a shallow ocean surrounded by land. So here's the Arctic Ocean, and it's surrounded by these are some of the big islands in the Canadian Arctic. This is Greenland. There's Iceland. You've got Norway up here. These islands belong to Norway. All of this is Russia, including these islands. This is all Russia. And then you come back around to the other side and you can't quite see it, but Alaska is in the bottom center. So a frozen ocean surrounded by continents, the exact opposite of Antarctica. And what's interesting is from the time we're kids, we hear about Santa's workshop at the North Pole, and it conjures up this image that there is this landmass there, or there is something permanent there. There isn't, other than the ocean. I went to the North Pole in 2015, and this was the most interesting sign I saw. The Russians had built a runway on the frozen Arctic Ocean, and they built a camp, and we could go and visit this camp, and then the helicopters would take us to the North Pole. But every day, the North Pole took a little bit longer to fly to because the camp and the runway were on this floating ice sheet, and the ice sheet was moving around depending on the currents and the waves of the Arctic Ocean. So the funniest thing we saw was this barber pole sign that said North Pole is here. And someone crossed out is and put was, because it was shifting. There is no land mass at the North Pole. And again, just a list of the countries that you might see because they encircle the Arctic or the North Pole. You've got Greenland, you've got Iceland, you've got Canada, Alaska, and then Russia, and then Norway right up here. And there again, these are the access points to get into the Arctic. The dotted line, the dotted blue circle that you see, that is the Arctic Circle. That is 66 degrees north. So everything north of that is considered within the Arctic. And if it's south of that, it's not considered the Arctic, it's the subarctic. This is the area right now that's getting 24 hours of daylight because it's the summer. In the winter, within the Arctic Circle, within this blue dotted line, is it's complete darkness for a number of months, for I think as many as 4 months. Now, given what we just said in your little geography test, the north, frozen ocean surrounded by continents, the south, frozen continent surrounded by ocean, where can you see polar bears and penguins in the same place? And feel free to chime in with your guesses.
You can unmute if you want, or you can put it in the chat.
Most of you, I suspect, are of the same vintage or perhaps even a little older than me. And I know that the place where we used to see penguins and polar bears in the same place was in a Coca-Cola commercial. That's the only place you can see them. Polar bears are in the north, penguins are in the south. That's just the way things have evolved. You won't see the two of them in the same place at the same time, other than in those old Coca-Cola commercials and maybe in a zoo. Very, very different. So speaking of wildlife, in the Arctic, one of the main reasons people go to the Arctic is they hope to see polar bears. But there are also walrus, reindeer, whales, foxes, owls, muskox, a narwhal, which is a type of whale that has a long, it's actually a tooth, but it's a big piece of ivory that sticks out. People call them the unicorns of the sea. So those are some of the wildlife we hope to and we might see when we go to the Arctic. And in Antarctica, people are hopeful to see penguins. I was told a long time ago by an Alaskan outfitter, never promise wildlife. I can promise you that if you go to Antarctica, you will see penguins, and you will see lots of them. Different species in different places in Antarctica, but you will see them by the thousands. Seals, Weddell seals, fur seals, leopard seals, you'll see whales, humpback whales, orcas, southern right whales, and seabirds. Albatrosses and skuas, they're also a predatory bird. They'll hunt the penguins, and they'll hunt, in particular, the penguin chicks and the penguin eggs. So lots of wildlife to see in Antarctica. Another big difference is that in the Arctic, particularly in Greenland and in Canada and Alaska, there are indigenous communities, Inuit people or Eskimos, as we were taught when we were kids. There is none of that in Antarctica. It is not permanently inhabited. In Antarctica, you'll find scientific research stations. The US, the UK, the Germans, the Indians, the Russians, the French, the Argentinians, the Chileans, the Ukrainians, I'm trying to think, the Italians. There are probably 20, maybe even more than 20 nationalities that maintain scientific research stations in Antarctica. So it's a pretty busy place from November to March during the Antarctic summer. Most of those stations shut down during the winter because it's pitch black for months on end and it's very, very cold. There are, I believe, 2 American stations that remain open throughout the year so that the scientists can conduct their research at different times of years. different things happen at different times of the year. What you're likely to see and how they differ, Antarctica versus the Arctic. The Arctic has fjords, so those long, narrow inlets that you see along the coast of Norway, up in the Norwegian islands called Svalbard. Even in Canada, there are some fjords, and in Greenland as well, eastern Greenland in particular. Tundra, icebergs, and big, tall cliffs. In Antarctica, loads of ice, lots of glaciers, like thousands and thousands and thousands of glaciers, and those are spitting off or calving off icebergs constantly, and then huge jagged mountain peaks. It's dramatic, both places, and regardless of where you look, it's spectacular and dramatic. Seasonality and access. So the Arctic, typically we would go expedition cruising there between May and September. Prior to May and after September, too cold and not enough hours of light. It gets pretty dark pretty quickly, and so you wouldn't spend much time there, or your time there, a lot of it would be in darkness. So we go during our summer. Right now is the time to visit the Arctic. There are some Arctic voyages that will go later in the season, sort of October, November, December, along the coast of Norway to go see Northern Lights specifically. It's technically not the Arctic. You're not as far north as the Arctic Circle. In Antarctica, the season is exactly the opposite. Our winter in North America is their summer. So that's when you will get the maximum number of hours of daylight in Antarctica, and when it's at its warmest, so between November and early March during the southern hemisphere summer. In terms of the style of travel, both in Antarctica and the Arctic, they use these rigid inflatable boats. The brand name typically is Zodiac. It's a French company, but they're made in the US, and these are a very specialized Zodiac. They cost to purchase them and outfit them the way they want them between $60,000 and $70,000 per piece. And they're called Mil Pro, so they're used for military and professional, in this case tourism, for those purposes. So both in the Arctic and Antarctica. Imagine the ship as like the safari lodge or the hotel, and imagine the Zodiacs as the jeeps to move around and get away from the ship and go to land, or to go and find where the whales are, to find where the polar bears are, to find where the penguins are. In Antarctica, it's a mix of hiking and cruising. And in the Arctic, the hiking's more limited. There is cruising as well, and there are local visits. And the reason that the hiking is limited in the Arctic, there's one reason in particular. I'll give you a second to think about what that might be, and then I'll tell you. The hiking in the Arctic isn't limited because the terrain is more difficult or anything like that. It's because of polar bears. We're in their territory, and they are an apex predator, and as big as they are, as heavy as they are, this is their turf, and they can hide very, very well. So we don't mess around when we're in polar bear country. We don't do as much hiking there because it's their turf. When we do go hiking, the team scouts from the ship using big binoculars and telescopes and spotting scopes, and they search and search and search and search. Anybody see any bears? No. Then 4 bear guards will go ashore first, and they'll set up a perimeter, and they're constantly looking out, binocular spotting scopes looking for bears. Then we bring the guests ashore. If one of those bear guards, and they're armed with rifles, the first thing are just banger shots, just cartridges that would make a loud noise to scare off the bears. Then the next cartridge is a rubber bullet, and then the next one, it gets more serious. But long before that ever happens, if someone spots a bear, all the guests get back in the Zodiacs, off the beach, and back out into the water and off to the ship. So we don't mean the bears any harm. We don't want anything to happen to the bears. One of the questions we often get is, how active are these trips? When you look at the regions, specifically in Antarctica, if we go early season, you might be able to go snowshoeing, ice camping, so overnight on the ice. In the Arctic, also more walking and local excursions when we get to villages. but they're not really that active. I mean, there's kayaking offered, the polar plunge if you want to jump into the water in both places, and hiking, as I mentioned, but you do not have to be an Olympic level athlete by any means. If you think you can get into and out of one of those zodiacs, you can go zodiac cruising, and you can go ashore and partake in the landings and some of these activities. And even if you don't have the mobility or the flexibility to get in and out of those zodiacs, you could still have a wonderful experience staying on the ship the entire time. You wouldn't get to see things as closely, let's say, as everybody else, but I've seen a number of people who go who don't have the flexibility or the mobility to get in and out of a zodiac. And even if they did, they wouldn't want to go hiking when they get ashore, and they stay on board and they have a perfectly good time. All of the lectures from the ornithologists and the glaciologists and the marine biologists, those all take place on board the ship. So when everybody's back aboard, that's when the lectures are happening. So you're not missing out on those either. And this isn't roughing it. You know, back in the day, the first time I went was 2002 on a Russian icebreaker. And it was a very, very different scenario. She's an old Russian icebreaker. And so the coverings on the couches and the chairs looked like my first car, an old Volkswagen Beetle that I had back in the 70s. The bathrooms were shared and down the hallway. There wasn't an attached bath. The meal was in kind of like a cafeteria. Things are very, very different now. This is luxury. This is like a floating luxury hotel at sea. And there are a number of different brands that do this. This is an image of one of the suites these days with your balcony, and you can, have your butler bring you coffee in the morning and go and enjoy your coffee on your balcony as you watch Antarctica go by as you're sailing to your next destination. This is the spa on board one of the Viking ships. Viking has the Octantis and the Polaris. This is their spa on board their ships. So spas, saunas on board the ships. It is not roughing it by any means. This is on one of the seaborne ships where they have this infinity pool at the stern of the ship and hot tubs on either side. You feel, again, like you're on some massive cruise ship or a luxury hotel somewhere. Typically, these cruise ships don't carry more than about 200 guests. These will be the smallest cruise ships you've likely ever been on. And the dining is phenomenal. Some of these ships will have as many as 4 dining rooms, specialty dining rooms, and spectacular food and spectacular service. So it is not roughing it by any means. What some of the new build ships also have is a science lab. A lot of people want to participate in some of the citizen science that's going on. So the cruise lines will invite scientists as their guests. The scientists get the opportunity to collect soil samples, sand samples, water samples, even feather samples, and conduct some of their research while they're on board, because these are fully outfitted laboratories. And then they invite you to come and participate as well. And they also lecture on their area of specialty. So you get to participate in that as well. So it's tough to choose, which one to go to. If it's your first trip and you're not sure you're going to do another polar trip, most people will opt for Antarctica. It's phenomenal for the wildlife and the scenery. And if you really want to feel remote and like you have left the rest of the world behind and get off the grid, Antarctica. The Arctic, because there are those cultural elements and the possibility to visit Inuit villages in Greenland and in Canada and Alaska, and if we can ever visit Russia again, we'd be able to do that as well. If you're curious about culture, if you want greater variety in landscapes, and if you've already been to Antarctica, then you may want to consider the Arctic. Now, then people say, okay, well, that's all nice and these beautiful cruise ships and everything and the wonderful food. Surely this is expensive. These are expensive trips. There's no two ways around it, and I won't sugarcoat it. They are premium trips. Antarctica tends to be a little bit more expensive because of supply and demand. There are more people that want to go to Antarctica, and there aren't that many ships, and the cruise ships, as I said, are quite small. So in a given season, we might send 100,000 people to Antarctica, and that number has climbed a lot in the last couple of years. It used to be 20, 30,000 people a year. Now we're sending 100,000 people a year to Antarctica over the course of 4 months. That's how many people Disney receives in less than a week. So put that in perspective, right? Highly specialized ships with highly specialized gear and highly trained and specialized staff. And not too many people going on small ships, or not too many operators offering it, I should say, and small ships. So not that many berths to choose from. So it is really supply and demand. So it does tend to be a little bit more expensive. These are once in a lifetime trips. These aren't your 3-night and 4-night Fort Lauderdale to Fort Lauderdale out to the Bahamas cruises. People think about these and they plan them over months and months and months. Some sample itineraries, just to give you an idea. In Antarctica, it's the peninsula. I mentioned that when I showed the map of Antarctica, the overhead view, the satellite image. This is the Antarctic Peninsula, this little finger of Antarctica. That's where 99% of voyages to Antarctica visit, because South America is so close. It's closer than Africa. It's closer than New Zealand. It's a 36-hour, sometimes 40 hours of sailing to get from the southern tip of South America to the tip of Antarctica. This is the part of Antarctica that thaws first. It's where the wildlife shows up first. It's where there's more wildlife because it is warmer. It's more attractive. Why are so many people in Florida? Because it's got better weather than up north. This area of Antarctica has the best weather, so we tend to see lots and lots of wildlife, and by lucky coincidence, it's easy to get to. So that's where most of the itineraries spend their time. In the Arctic, again, it's all over the place. You might see itineraries that start in Alaska, go over the top of Canada, and finish in Greenland. You'll see itineraries that focus in the Canadian Arctic. You'll see itineraries that focus in Greenland, in and around the bottom of Greenland. You'll see itineraries that focus exclusively in Norway. Up until 3-4 years ago, some expedition cruise lines were sailing in the Russian Arctic as well, and it has a lot to offer. And that's likely not going to come back anytime soon. So the Arctic, there are more places to go to and more entry points. And depending on where you go and what time of year, you'll see different things in the Arctic. The Antarctic, again, we tend to go to one place or one part of Antarctica, and it varies depending on the time of year as well. So let's do a little quiz. Which pole is right for you? Which polar region, the Arctic or Antarctic? So which wildlife encounter sounds more exciting to you? A polar bear paddling across the ice?
Oh, sorry, I was going to say that again, but you guys can unmute so you can answer him, okay? Sorry, Carl, say that again.
I didn't hear what you were saying, Ted.
I was saying they can unmute.
And well, they might just want to write it down, and because we're going to do a little thing at the end.
Or they can do it in the chat. Okay. Sorry, you go ahead.
Okay, so which pole is right for you? Question number 1. This is a little quiz. Which wildlife encounter sounds more exciting? A, a polar bear paddling across the ice, or B, a penguin parade right past your boots? And that can literally happen.
You can put it in the chat.
Question number 2, do you want to A, learn about indigenous culture in remote communities, or B, step where few humans have ever set foot? Question 3, your dream photo is A, a sunset over Arctic fjords and icebergs, or B, a mountain-sized glacier calving into the ocean? Question number 4, when do you want to travel? A, summer, our summer, May to September, or B, the winter holidays or early spring, November to March. Next question. Your sense of adventure leans toward A, a mix of hikes, boat rides, and maybe a hot air balloon over the ice. Or B, kayaking through brash ice and maybe sleeping out on the snow. Next question, you're more intrigued by A, visiting places like Greenland, Svalbard, or northern Canada, or B, crossing the Drake Passage and landing on the seventh continent. And lastly, pick your polar companion, A, a reindeer, muskox, or Arctic fox, or B, a leopard seal, a humpback whale, or thousands and thousands of penguins. If your answers were mostly A, your team Arctic, you're curious and culture-loving, craving a mix of wild nature and human connection, the Arctic offers a broader range of landscapes and experiences, and yes, polar bears. The polar bears would never, ever be this close. We would never let you get this close to a polar bear because it would kill you. You are food to the polar bear. This was an AI-generated image, but I thought it was kind of fun. If your answer was mostly bees, then your team Antarctica. You're drawn to the edge of the earth. You want remote, raw, and ridiculous amounts of penguins. Antarctica delivers otherworldly beauty and the thrill of true isolation. Now, there are regulations about how close you're supposed to get to penguins, but the penguins can't read. So they haven't read those regulations, and they will sometimes walk up to you. I had a penguin chick, like this little one right in the center, tugging at my pant leg and at my backpack straps. I was sitting on a rock, just sitting there waiting, because everybody else was over there, and I wanted to sit by myself. So I sat over there and sat on a rock, and this penguin chick waddled right up to me and started tugging on my pant leg and started tugging on my backpack strap. That's how close you'll get to one, or can get to him. So if you're still not sure, give this some thought. Do you want more culture? Visiting the Inuit villages and seeing how they live? Arctic. If penguins are on your bucket list and you got to check that off, it has to be Antarctica. If you have to go in the summer because you're unwilling to travel over Christmas, or the period between November, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, that's just too busy for you. The kids are home from college and you can only travel during the summer, then again, you got to think about the Arctic. Now, TED only works with partners that we trust. There are over 30 companies that operate in Antarctica. We work with about 8 of them because they are the 8 that we believe pay attention to detail. They train their staff very well. They're very, very careful. Safety is their number one priority. So we only work with vetted and experienced companies. These are small ships, again, typically around 200 guests, expert guides, and sustainable practices. We don't want them dumping garbage in Antarctica or the Arctic. These are very, very fragile ecosystems. And again, safety is the captain's number one priority. He will give up the voyage if he has to maintain everyone's safety. That's why we work with a select few companies rather than all 30 of them that operate in Antarctica. And we're here to help you. And if you choose to book something like this, we're here to help you right through the entire process, not just the cruise, but the flights, talk to you about gear, talk to you about insurance, help you prepare for the cold. If you're not used to it and you don't have the right gear, we'll talk to you about how you want to dress for the cold. A lot of the companies will provide you with the boots that you need and a great big parka, but what about long johns, and what about the layering system? What about mittens and a hat and things like that? We can help you with that. We'll help talk through that and get you packing lists and just expert guidance, from start to finish. The goal, regardless of which one you think about, the sense of awe and the sense of wonder that you'll experience in either one of these places is incredible. You will feel tiny when you're in these polar regions. So if you've got questions, we've got time. We can open up mics and you can go ahead and ask. When you're ready to explore, just let Ted know. Thanks very much for joining us. We're here to answer your questions and help you get to the ends of the earth. There's no wrong choice, right? Whether you choose Antarctica or the Arctic, the only mistake I would say is in not going at all. You really do want to go, and we're ready, and we're here to help you.
We have a question.
Go ahead.
Is there any company that can help with someone with mobility problems who has only not visited one continent, and that is Antarctica, and wants to go and step foot on it at least once.
Okay. How restricted is the person's mobility?
I've got neuropathy, but I use a cane to get around.
Okay. That wouldn't be an issue. If you were wheelchair bound, I would say, we would really have to consult with the cruise line, because there are issues even in getting you into the Zodiac and getting you across and then getting you out of the Zodiac. But if you're capable of walking, albeit with a cane, there are a number of people. As a matter of fact, in both regions, but particularly Antarctica, because very often you're walking on snow and ice, they will provide you with trekking poles. And a lot of people who are not familiar with walking on snow and ice will take 2 trekking poles, because they give you that third and fourth point of contact so that people feel a little more stable on the ice. In conversations with Ted, and when you find when you want to go and what itinerary you want to go on, how long you want to be away for, and as we start to zero in on which cruise line, then it's worth a secondary phone call to that cruise line and get their sales rep. I don't represent one cruise line or the other. I used to, but I don't anymore. Now I'm just independent and speak to the whole concept. But once you narrow it down to a cruise line, then get their sales rep on the phone or on a video call and chat with them and explain the mobility restrictions. But if you think you can step into, a Zodiac, are you familiar with a rigid inflatable boat or a Zodiac?
Yes.
It's just hard for him to get in and out. He would need a little assistance.
Could I answer that? Could I answer that, Carl?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, Carl's an expert on this. Well, one thing I do is you don't need to call the cruise line, you call me. Why? First of all, I've been on most of these ships, Hurtigruten, Silver Sea. I've been on, I've been in Arctic. I've been on Mendenhall Glacier with the helicopter. These crew and I've even taken my wife, who didn't even get off the boat, but just being out there and looking at the ice. Like she's still showing pictures. It's on her TV screen. Every day she spends 10 minutes looking at the pictures we take. And she didn't even go out there. So don't think you can't go. If you can get into the ship, get into a room, you can go, okay? Maybe you can't go out. There's one thing to consider, like Silver Sea, you can go to Ushuaia. They built a hotel, which is the lowest point before Antarctica. They built a hotel just there where they can take off with a plane and land you there. However, you do have to walk a bit and get into a Zodiac. So that may not be the preferred way to go there. You might want to go on a cruise ship. But there's all different kinds, like Carl mentioned. So you kind of have to know what you're working with. So I would be the person to call, not Carl. He's with a big network, signature network with tens of thousands of travel agents like me. But I'm the one to call. I've been doing this since the turn of the century. I've helped tens of thousands of people with small ship, ocean, and river cruises. How's that?
Okay, he just wants to set foot on it.
Yeah. So what I was going to say, or what I asked about the Zodiac, you're familiar with those. Do you think you have the mobility to get because a lot of people think they need to step into the Zodiac and then step out of the Zodiac. What the expedition staff have learned over the years, that the easier way to do it is to actually sit down on the pontoon, that long inflatable tube that goes along one side, and then swing your legs around and in. And similarly, when you're getting out of the Zodiac, remain seated on the pontoon, swing your legs around to the other side, and then someone will help lift you up. So whether it's getting off of the ship and into the Zodiac, or getting out of the Zodiac and onto land, there are always sailors there or expedition staff, and sometimes they're up to their knees in water. They're wearing waders, and they'll put a little footstool down so that you don't have that long step from the pontoon all the way into the water or to the beach. They'll put a step stool in so that you've got a shorter step, and then they'll teach you about the sailor's grip.
Right.
They're gripping your wrist and their wrist. So there's lots of help. And to be very, very honest, they are used to a demographic that is older, because who has the time and the money to go to Antarctica? It's typically older folks, right? So they're used to, the expedition team and the sailors and the ABs, the able-bodied seamen, they are used to this older crowd that sometimes have mobility issues, and they will teach you the sailor's grip, and they'll tell you where to step and where to sit and where to pivot your bottom and pivot your legs around. So this is not uncommon.
Thank you for watching. To start planning your own polar adventure, connect with Cruisin' with Ted today at 406-360-8059.